As I'm sure you all know by now, Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s is the current Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime airing here in English. Obviously, the dub is airing on Disney XD, but I've been hearing a lot of hate for this series, and I just want to address it in this video, talking about why I think it's kind of overhated. Now, so far, the show has just been like pretty much every other Yu-Gi-Oh! Show. Our main characters go on episodic, wacky adventures that, of course, end up in a duel, where the main character usually picks up the win. And I gotta say, it's done a pretty good job at that, but there's a lot of hate for it, especially people thinking that it's not a good turn for the franchise. But I think it is. Now, one of the major complaints I hear is that people wanted them to play the Master Rule game, which is of course the traditional game that every other anime before it has played. Which, yes, I do love the Master Rule game, but it's become very complicated and a lot of people have dropped off of the game and just don't try to get back into it because of how complicated it's gotten. Now, if you didn't know, Rush Duel is basically just like Speed Duel, but a lot more unique. You see, it's its very original format where the card game plays entirely different, and it even has some of its own original cards rather than just trying to take it back to the good old days. And you can tell that Konami's really pushing it, as they even gave it its very own video game despite not really advertising it that well, but that goes the same for every other Yu-Gi-Oh! Product. But moving on, another complaint that I hear is that it's too goofy, it's too wacky, and it seems like it's just for little kids. And anytime somebody says that, it really agitates me because they make it seem as if Yu-Gi-Oh! Is this very serious anime on par with things like Dragon Ball Z and Demon Slayer. But may I remind you, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, which was the second Yu-Gi-Oh! Series and a sequel to the original Duel Monsters anime, started off very goofy with its episodic episodes, which had people like Cyrus getting sat on and people being late for class. Very simple subjects to get the ball rolling. Now, GX did get very dark towards the end, but that's a key factor. Towards the end. It wasn't crazy serious till maybe season 3 or 4, and season 4 never came to the English dub, so most people don't even know there was a season 4 to GX. And of course, Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal and the show that came directly after it, Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, also were pretty goofy shows with simple subjects. Now, personally, I think Zexal is a great show and is very underrated. And I think Arc 5 is probably the worst in the whole series, but I'll go into that in a later video. But the main point is that they were also very simple and goofy and kind of for kids. Now, moving on to the biggest complaint I hear from fans is the show's art style. Now, yes, I do prefer the original art style a lot more, but it only seems bad when people compare it to the original Kazuki Takahashi art style. In reality, after watching about the first 3 or 4 episodes, you really get used to it and realize it's not nearly as bad as it seems. And although I think it's okay to not watch this show because it looks unappealing, I think you should still give it a chance. For example, 7 Deadly Sins has awful animation, yet it still has a very huge fanbase. Now, before I end this video off, I just want to talk about the overall future of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise. Now, it seems as if we are in a brand new era, which for the time being, we'll just call it the 7th era. And this era has its very own art style and seems to focus on the Rush Duel game rather than the Master Duel game. Now, I forgot to mention that in Japan, 7s ended a while ago, and they are already on the second show featuring Rush Duel, which is titled Yu-Gi-Oh! Go Rush, which seems to be a lot more of a 5D's serious title. And 7s did really good in Japan, so I wouldn't expect this era of Yu-Gi-Oh! To end anytime soon, and I'm sure it will at least get a trilogy of shows. Now, of course, there have already been 2 trilogies of Yu-Gi-Oh! Shows. I definitely don't think this 7's trilogy will be able to beat the OG 3 shows, Duel Monsters, 5Ds, and GX, as those shows were basically the peak of Yu-Gi-Oh! And even had their own movie together. But I definitely do think it has the potential to beat the second trilogy. As I mentioned earlier, I think Zexal's pretty good, Arc 5 is meh, and Vrains, I haven't gotten around to seeing it because it's basically nowhere to be found. I mean, at this point, you could just consider Vrains to be lost media. Now, the last point I want to make here is that they have to adapt to the new audience. The same people watching Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2022 aren't exactly going to be the same people who were watching in, 2005. As I'm sure you all know, The card game, ball throwing, kids anime genre is constantly changing and always has a new competitor. Everybody wants to be number one, and sometimes you can be number one, but you can also fall off very quickly. For example, look at Digimon. Now, I'm fully aware that Digimon's still pretty popular in Japan, but over here in America, it was only really popular for its debut show, and after that fell off extremely. One of the main reasons why it fell off so hard is because it got replaced with none other than Beyblade. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it right now. There was a time where Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, and Digimon were the big three, but once I think the metal era of Beyblade came around, Digimon was immediately surpassed. And one thing Beyblade seems to have over every other piece of this market is that it seems to get more popular with every new iteration. Now, yeah, the original series was popular, but the Metal series was even more popular, and the recent Burst saga was even more popular. Although the last few seasons of Burst were absolutely horrible, with Sparking probably being the worst anime I've ever seen, I still have to agree that it was still pretty popular. And despite how much I hate it, the recent Bakugan reboot is also pretty popular with the kids nowadays, despite it not being nearly as good as its original counterpart. So overall, I just think them having an anime with a lot simpler subjects and a much quicker and easier to learn game, it'll help them survive in this war a lot quicker. One of current Yu-Gi-Oh's biggest issues is that it can't bring in enough new blood due to the anime being pretty complicated and the game being complicated. And with the new Sevens anime, it can solve that issue. And that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe. See you around.